So we're back again after a bit of an absence. We say this every single time, but both myself and Joseph here lead very busy lives. But we're keen to press on with Book 2, Chapter 21 to Chapters 26, a review on Jeanne d'Arc, as you would call it, or Joan of Arc. Joseph, do you want to get this ball rolling? Do you want to say anything before we get started? Any little thoughts?
Last time we dealt with with a good chunk of the liberation of Orleans, and this time we deal with, combat filled, or I don't know if combat is the right term, but quite the heated chapters. You have, for one thing, Jeanne, who at the start of chapter 21 is with Catherine and Louis de Comte, and is dictating a letter. She is explaining in after her greetings and loving words that she is about to get injured. It's not something worth worrying about. Catherine interrupts her and says, "Whoa, whoa, you need to strike those words out." She's thinking of a wounded foot, while Jeanne is speaking of a much greater injury, in injury by arrow, which does strike later in the chapter. It's one of the miracles, from what I remember, that Jeanne is said to have performed, where she predicted she would receive an arrow wound. She still carried the way with the battle, but this is one of those incidences which are quite special for her.
I felt that this chapter needed just a little bit of a contextual overview. Not to interrupt you, it very much reminds me of the "Get behind me, Satan" moment in the Bible. So Jesus is saying, "I'm going to go up and I'm going to be put to death," and Peter says to him, "Lord, this isn't going to happen to you."
Oh yeah. They say, "Don't talk like that."
Yeah, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, I've always wondered when he said that, was that a sort of a phrase that we don't use now, but may have been common to the era, because Peter here was not Satan. So I sometimes wonder if this is a phraseology. But he is literally predicting the demise, and then Peter plays the natural human instinct of, "No, this can't happen to you. No, 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 no." And Catherine here is saying the same thing. She's going, "No, this can't happen to you," because she's writing a letter to her mother, isn't she, to say, "Don't worry about me and my injury." Yeah. And she goes, "No, don't do that." And she goes, "Okay, you're right. You can deliver this letter. I'm not going into battle tomorrow." And of course, Catherine sees the error of her ways, much like Peter must have in the moment gone, "Hang on, what am I doing questioning the Lord?" That kind of, how foolish am I? And I just felt like that was a good, again, because I've said this so many times, Mark Twain, writer of this novel, he has laced this with biblical thoughts, and I just think it's a good step back and re-examine of the chapter.
It is.
Do you agree? Yeah, well, you said it is, yeah.
Yeah, and building on that, there's something that happens on, it's page 254 of the edition I have.
Yeah.
And you have Catherine, who says, because Jeanne assures her it was her voices that told her this. Yeah. Catherine asks, "But are you sure it was they?" "Quite sure." And there, Catherine seems doubtful, almost implying that it would be more the devil who would witch things rather than Jeanne's angelic voices.
Great point.
And Jeanne ends up just saying, now she's asked, "How long have you known?" And she says, "Since I think it is several weeks." Like, the way Jeanne treats it is as more like, it's just something like, "Oh, well, there was a fender broken in my car." "Well, when did that happen?" I think it was a few weeks ago. I can't remember. It's not important to her. And you have her asking or consulting with Louis. "Louis, you will remember. How long is it?" "Your Excellency spoke of it first to the king in Chinon." And he mentions that it was around the 20th and also the 22nd, 2 weeks ago. And he has to check his record to make sure of this. And these details really disturb Catherine, who becomes frightened. And Jeanne assures her it is le 7 de Mai, which is the date when she's to receive her injury. At which point Catherine says, "You can't step out of the house then." And you've got you've got Jeanne who takes the attitude that her is more important. That like, would you have me hide from the world for fear of we also got to bear in mind the kind of, I don't know how to call it, but the literature or culture that medieval people and even Mark Twain was far more connected to than we are probably today. They were connected to Greek and Roman literature and even Norse literature. And in such literature, let's say you try to run away from your fate or a kind of injury or death, it'll, no matter what, find you, no matter if you hide from it. And in that regard, that is the kind of logic Jeanne is kind of employing here. Catherine is thinking more like, for example, uh, the one king in Greek mythology who decided to lock up his daughter in a tower in order to hide from the death that was to come to him from one of his descendants. Of course,
Yes.
later that descendant shows up, and because she's impregnated by golden rain for things because of Zeus. So that's the sort of thing that's the sort of literature, philosophy Jeanne is more connected to, and even Mark Twain is more connected to than we are today.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So were you suggesting then that while we've moved on in advancement with access to media and literature, back then they had a restricted amount of literature, but so that restriction forced them to have a concentration on seminal works of art and, works that resonated closer with their souls, because now we read and want to be connected to things in the here and now that affect us immediately. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think that you make a good point, and I think that what has happened is that there's a saying by Michael Crichton, the writer of Jurassic Park and a bunch of other great novels, where with the internet, with the advent of it, we have tried to purge illiteracy, but we have instead purged thought. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I think that by moving away from the classics like we have and moving away from traditional um, literature and traditional, what is our heritage, notre héritage, we have lost our own civilization in a way. We've, like, you look at England, um, is England even England without uh, Chaucer, Shakespeare, the likes of Dickens, Austen, and Tolkien? And you look at France. Is it really France without Molière or uh, Dumas or Hugo or like any other number of great writers like that, like Maurice Druon? That's the thing. I think that we've become disconnected from our own souls in a way. Mark Twain, for example, you might say that the Bible is the foundation for civilization, and it is. But so are Aristotle and Plato and St. Augustine. Civilization is not just, say, the books from 2,000 years ago. It's everything from over the course of 2 millennia. It's over the course of centuries and millennia that you build a civilization, you build a culture. Today, you have to include things like maybe American civilization, Don Bluth, Walt Disney, George Lucas, like all these great um, creatives in other mediums. But we don't. In the past 20 years, we become disconnected from even that. So I think that things are shedding their civilization in a way, which, or at least they have been for a bit, and that's not healthy. That's not good, and that only leads to a crunch. And to an extent, what people forget is that this happened before. You look at the end of the Roman period when Rome when the Western Empire was being colonized by barbarians and they no longer felt connected to their own literature, their own civilization, we have to bear in mind the Romans didn't just disappear. They in some cases were subsumed into the barbarians. In other cases, they intermingled because the nobility turned on the peasantry even more so than before. The empire stopped serving the interests of Rome, and so Rome had to turn to the barbarians in a way. But the barbarians had their own culture. But as the centuries progressed, they mingled and merged together so that you have the Francs, for example, or les Français, who became half Roman, half, well, barbarian. And this was important. So today we're kind of in a process like what the Romans were at one point. But I think that inevitably the classics must return. For example, Twain and Dickens and whatnot, they have to return as well. I know a lot of people, like as Razorfist once put it, the black pill bedwetters would like to say, well, no, it's over. It's all dead. It's gone. It's never coming back. But I spent about a week in the US, and what I saw and met in the south of the US was um, a lot of people who were far more well read than I originally expected, because where I am in Canada, no one reads outside my brother and I. And it's very easy to become depressed about the situation in the world. But when I was in the South USA, it like I met quite a few people who have read so very, like they all spoke of like Twain with great familiarity. They spoke of, and these were mostly Americans, a few Europeans. They spoke of Twain and Dickens and whatnot. They're all animation majors, but there was a familiarity. So I think we are divorced in a way from those seminal classics, but they will come back. We have been forcibly segregated from them. But the walls are breaking down. The walls have to fall. The fortress is going to come tumbling down. Like once upon a time, I didn't even hear of John Julius Norwick, for example. But then a while back, I remember hearing about him in a podcast. And after that, I hear a lot about John Julius Norwick, despite the fact that he's passed away. But his histories of Sicily and Constantinople are getting to be popular reading in a lot of historic circles. So, like, I don't know if this is just me rambling.
You are rambling a little bit. And if the listener is listening, if anyone listening into this, we have really diverted off the book. But I do appreciate the sentiment of what you're saying, which is, we are, as a society, we seem to have let go of the importance of our historical route and the channel by which we've got here. That's left for the reader and the listener on this occasion to decide, Is it more important that we're in the here or now, or is it more important that we examine our past?
For me, in my view, the past is more important, because without the past, you have no present or future.
If you remember what George Orwell said, he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. It's an interesting concept, what really is the past, because all you have is, like if I asked you to document the present right now, you could only document it from your perspective. So the past is what others have documented, and you've got to assume truth in all words. Chapter 22, the fate of France is decided. Okay, now this chapter for me starts off with this concept where Joan, for me, it's either a mistake by Twain, or it's very deliberate by Twain, and he is trying to create this idea that even Joan isn't perfect when she is the perfect character. Because in the very first paragraph, Joan, it says she couldn't afford the patience, she being in such a blaze of anxiety. And he conveys this running out of time. However, patience is a seminal quality of a Christian. So if you look at the seminal qualities listed out in Galatians of a Christian, one of them is patience. And she doesn't have the patience anymore. So either he's forgotten that, which I don't believe, because Mark Twain is not the sort, he seems to understand this very deeply. I think he's pointing out that she's not perfect, and her mission allows her to be impatient. We discussed that in an earlier chapter, didn't we? Where there were certain things that she was willing to cross for the greater good. Like there are things she's willing to forego in her servitude to France. And she conveys it with strength, because further on she asks the question, whither would ye suppose? I am going to take Tourelle. Or I'm going to take the Tourelle. And to me, it's like her impatience and her strength are now coming together, and she is willing to forego a little bit of Christianity to be what she needs to be. What are your thoughts?
I think you make a lot of good points, and I think that, for one thing, I'm always in shock at her injury in this chapter, and just I've always find myself just amazed that she could overcome such physical pain. I mean, I'm one of those guys who all but sobs like a baby at the dentist, and she
We're all surprised.
just takes almost an arrow through the heart and just soldiers on. I have to ask, Sam, because you said something very poetic, and that's got me thinking. Because I'm a very impatient person when it comes to getting on in life. Like, I always get impatient and prefer to charge on ahead impatiently. But and so I'm always scolded. Impatience is a flaw. Impatience is a weakness, and whatnot. But you said that with her impatience and her come together, and she pulls off this great victory. In her case, would you say that impatience is more a virtue? Because that's a fascinating. Like, it's fascinating what you ended up saying.
Well, there is an argument to this, okay? It's because, so for example, based on the Christian tenets of patience, so we're defining patience often from our human standpoint, but let's not forget Jesus created that whip with ropes and beat out the money exchangers in the temple. Now you could say, well, why was he so impatient? Why was he so impatient in that moment? Why was he so angry? Why did he act in this strongman way and physically whip other humans for doing something that he found disgusting? Because he could have gone out there patiently and said, guys, come on, let's not do this. Come on. And so poetically, I believe there is a place for the time is now. Action. It is required. Now is the moment. And so, because if you've got infinite patience, then nothing would get done. So there has to be a moment in which your patience runs out. Like, for example, it says, Peter comes to Jesus and he says, could you forgive me? I've forgiven my brother up to 7 times. And Jesus goes, up to 77 times. But he was talking about a righteous forgiveness, which is a forgiveness when someone is genuinely apologized. Someone's come to you and apologized. If they haven't apologized, you don't need to forgive, because they haven't done anything to enact the forgiveness. Which means, therefore, your patience can run out. I'm not doing anything about it. I'm done. My patience has run out. And then Jesus said, in fact, if you go to take your gift to the altar and you know there's a problem between you and your brother, go resolve it before you offer your altar. So you don't be patient about this. Go get it done. Act strong. So strength is the antidote to over-patience. So I think you're right. I've had to work that out. I've been talking for a few minutes. I've had to literally talk that through to a conclusion to get there myself, because I have not been certain of the idea. So that's literally, guys, that's me talking in the moment, answering a question. So I think, yeah, there is an answer to patience can be ended if you're going to take a godly and strong like course of action. I just had to hit record.
I'm actually in awe of your sagesse there.
Well, I had to talk my way through it. It probably took me about 4 or 5 minutes.
I'm very impressed. Not trying to insult you. It's just I've never thought about it any that way in regards to life. Yeah, like, you truly are Samwise there.
I need to interrupt you just for 1 second, and I need to look down the camera. I am not wise.
No problem.
I am not wise. I appreciate the kind words. I won't take credit for this. I've had great people around me who have instructed me. I've had great counsellors through my life that have talked to me about a lot of subjects, and I am not particularly good at patience, and it's something I work hard on because I'm not a patient person. So I'm not particularly wise. I appreciate the words; they're very kind of you, but I can't take the compliment, no matter what, because I don't live up to that standard.
I will insist on complimenting you, my friend. And honestly, in regards to the Bible, I'm only going to ramble for 1 minute and wonder about now the idea in Catholicism is that God is perfect. And he's learning, and learned from Noah, and from there he became perfect, or something to that effect. But with Jesus, like whenever I'd read that part of the Bible, I'd wonder if when he was incarnated into the flesh of a man, if maybe in a way he kind of took on human traits, flaws, and in that he became impatient. All the philosophical connotations of what it means for him to get impatient with those merchants, and I've always thought that story was fascinating. Not like I'm not trying to insult Jesus there, far be it for me to insult someone obviously wiser than me and who accomplished far more by 32 years old than I have. Mm-hmm. But I read it and I go, fascinating. I wonder, like part of me almost wishes I could have a conversation direct in at some point, not right away. Maybe once I cross over in so many decades, I'd like to sit down and just chat with him, because I'd love to pick his brain about that moment.
Well, there's two things to add to this. There's a scripture that talks about Jesus learning obedience. So he learns obedience. So obedience didn't just come naturally. He had to learn it while he was on earth. And then a second thought, which is, I think, really important, is the law was fulfilled. If you remember, he says the law is fulfilled through me. And my understanding of that is that because he conducted his life in perfect harmony with the law and the spirit of the law of Moses, and the law was literally in Hebrews it talks about it being a foreshadowing of the future, of what would be once Jesus had died. So it was a written down version almost of love. The fact that he fulfilled the law suggests that he never broke the law.
True. He gave way to impatience.
Possibly, but in a righteous way, because for example, God gives way to wrath and anger, but at the right time, in a righteous manner.
Yeah, I just meant, like I guess I just look at it almost in a Tolkienian sense, just in that when you have a great spirit like that incarnates into man, like I ponder about the metaphysics and about the psychological aspects.
I get that.
And I guess that part of theology even more fascinating.
I just want to comment on one sentence in this chapter. So after this, so we've gone through the whole chapter where, sorry, 1 second. So basically, she's gone through that battle, been wounded, and then she resurrects herself when she sees the men fleeing, and she goes, no, definitely not. And she finds the power within herself to overcome even her own pain, to make sure that they win this battle. And then right at the end, at the very end of the second to last paragraph, it says, that was the cry, I heard it 100,000 times. Welcome to our maid. I wrote on the side, that's expressing their devotion. She was one of them. So these people that are cheering, welcome to our maid, they've taken her as one of their own now. Whereas the first section of that book, we've been looking at people doing battle with her and not trusting her and not relying on her and finding little left ways and right ways to get around it. But now you hear the people screaming, welcome to our maid. She's theirs. There's no question in these people's minds. They're cheering for what is their own. And I really love that just little addition.
She became one of them. But actually, I'm going to argue something weird. She was always one of them. It's more that they needed to realize she was one of them before they could realize it.
Yeah.
She knew it. They needed to come up. They need to realize it. That said, I'm going to leave off chapter this chapter with one thing because it's mentioned that May 8th is still celebrated in France with civic and military pomps and solemnities. I don't think that's Mark Twain being fictional, but I do wonder, like, if there's anyone from France itself who can comment in the comment section or has seen May 8th in France, I would love to know if this is actually still the case.
Yeah. It'd be easy to find out. I'll find out and make sure it's in the video. By the time this is ready, it'll be. I'll find out if May 8th is still celebrated in Orleans. Okay. Chapter 23, Joan inspires the tawdry king. Now, for those of you who sat there going, I know exactly what tawdry means, don't worry, I'm not patronising you. But there are some that might be going, what does tawdry mean? And tawdry means showy, but it's in poor taste or poor quality. So that's what the word tawdry means. Often reflective of people's clothing, which it is in this chapter. After you.
This chapter is noteworthy for how Jeanne is prepped into giving out her dearest wish, and she's told, name it, name it. And she says, oh, dearie and gracious Dauphin. He's anything but. That's my opinion. I hate this Dauphin. I have but one desire, only one. If any interrupts her because he's rude and unworthy, do not be afraid, my child. Name it. That you will not delay a day. My army is strong and valiant and eager to finish its work. March with me to Rheims and receive your crown. And naturally, his courage fails him, and many are shocked at her proposition as she proposes the boldest strategy imaginable. And no offense, but the most surefire one that could break the back, or at least the political back of England. Because at this time, England is through Henry the, what was it, sixth, who is born from a Capet Valois mom and, of course, a Lancaster father. The claim is that he has a claim to the throne of France through both sides of his lineage. Now, to an extent, you have La Loi Salique, the Salic law, which bars the female inheritance. But because Henry V seems to have been adopted into the French monarchy, which that's not how it works, but the claim is at the time. Henry VI has a claim, but the real kind of viceroy of France on behalf of Henry is Bedford, I believe it is, a powerful and incredible duke. And the thing is, the political claim to the French throne and the fact that the English kings have been crowned in France is political theater. And the theater is as good as the fact at a lot of times. The French Dauphin have been crowned. So politically, the symbolism is on the side of the English here. And Jeanne is proposing to completely snap it and break it so that the English will no longer have that those symbolic fangs. They'll be unfanged politically.
Can I just add at this point? Can I just bring into this? Sorry, 1 second, because I want to bring some context for the viewer. I'm going to put up a map now of France, and you will see that they are down in Orleans. And I want you to understand when she's asking the king, "March with me to Rheims." Rheims is spelt Rheims, but pronounced Rheims. Is all the way up in past Paris and going up into Champagne country. And where this is, there's a huge cathedral, and it was, so while we think of Paris and Notre Dame as the sort of like the capital of France, Reims was where kings were crowned, and it was their spiritual home. It was where the monks, basically the monks were sort of situated in two cities in France, and one of them was Reims. And so when you think of Dom Perignon, the champagne, he was from Reims. And so she's asking him, let's march with me. He was looking at it going, that is a long way through English territory. And it was. everything. When you look at that map, the map will tell you how many miles it is. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it's quite a few hundred miles. This is English territory on all sides, and it's a long, long, long way. And so that's just for context right now. Hopefully I'll have brought up by now the cathedral, the distance, and just etc, etc, etc. Hopefully you're just getting a feel for what she's actually asking him and why he went from being this guy of pomp and ceremony to a coward. And he was a coward because she was going, let's go, and he was going, how about no? Essentially.
One other thing. Jeanne has an uphill battle because she has to get through English territory with a very unwilling.
Yeah, she does. Interestingly as well, so my point from this chapter, I have a very small point from this chapter. Visually I had that big point, but my actual takeaway point, there's a paragraph where Sir Louis de Comte, who is the author of this, obviously Mark Twain is the author, but he's playing the character of Sir Louis de Comte, and he says, I was ashamed of him, talking about the king, and yet that was not fair. For how could he be expected to know this marvellous child in these few weeks, when we, who thought we had known her all her life, were daily seeing the clouds uncover some new altitude of her character, whose existence was not suspected by us before. He here is making this point that's spoken of in Proverbs or Ecclesiastes about not becoming righteous or overly righteous in your own eyes. Okay, so for a brief moment he looks down on the king like, oh, how could you be like this? But then he remembers, wait, I do this as well, and I've been with her my whole life. He gets to see her here and there, and has only known her for a few months. I've known her my whole life, and I still misjudge her. And this guy doesn't get to see her. So he judged the king for a minute, and he admits he judges him for the rest of his life because he doesn't approve of him as a king. But in this moment, he judged him wrong because that judgment should be reflected back on himself. So it's a really clever point that was made by Solomon all those thousands of years ago. Do not become overly righteous or righteous in your own eyes. Don't take the things that you've got good at and think other people should be good at them. Very interesting point. Very well enunciated in this moment. And that was just my takeaway point.
Yeah, it's a good takeaway. Although, I guess because I myself love Jeanne so much, both from the history in this book, I have a hard time not feeling a certain amount of loathing or hatred for Charles. And there have been times I've met some French who refuse to ever acknowledge him almost in their king's list. Like, they'd rather skip over his reign because they don't consider him worthy.
But that's so French. That's so French.
Like, the amount of hatred I've seen directed at him, and I've felt for him, is far more than Charles Le Fou ever receives.
But a fool never receives hatred.
A fool never receives hatred. He receives disdain.
Yep.
The incompetent receive hatred.
Well, many feel disdain. I've seen some call him worse than Judas because at least Judas repented, is what a lot of people tend to say that I've met. But anyways, real quick, one thing about Jeanne's title is La Dame du Lit, of the Lily. The Lady of the Lily. I love that title, La Dame du Lit. And Jeanne reads people. So, du lit, this is a pun in that you are reading a book, I think. This is a pun by Twain. But there's also the fact that Jeanne is reading people. And people are unable to properly read her at every turn and fail to properly come to understand her greatness until it is too late. And you have, of course, Lily. And the thing is, flowers are often associated with femininity. And the thing about France is we have to bear in mind le trône du lit, or le trône de lit. That is to say, the lily throne is a term for the French throne. And you have, I've even seen the term the lily the monarchs of the lily, or les monarques du lit, in reference to France's monarchs. So in a way, she's not exactly adopted into the royal family, but she's just below them, at least in terms of the honors shown to her, in terms of the word. But like I said, there's you can probably, like, her detractors would probably see a dirty joke there in Julie to be bedded or led. Those who admire, who like a good joke without being foolish, would like to read. And then there's the Lily bit. So there's a lot of, this is Twain at his finest. There's a lot of wordplay going on there that he puts there with this name.
After what you've just said, this neatly sandwiches us into the next chapter, because this ennoblement of Jeanne obviously passes to her two brothers, Jean and Pierre. And one of your favourite characters in this novel is the paladin. How does he feel about this passing on of nobility to two people such as Pierre and Jean?
I'm not sure he much likes it, because he likes to think of himself as foremost amongst all.
I think the realisation of chapter 24, when he goes, "Oh no, I thought I was the best," and then suddenly realises he's not the best. Two people he views as inferior are now above him. And Noël Ronguisson plays on that no end. It's fantastic. I love it. It really makes me laugh.
What I like is the standard he gets to, how there's so much talk about the standard and that he carries, and how it has les lits de France, the lilies of France, and how it's royal. Yeah. This is something that you've got, of course, you've got the comment from Paladin that, like, he's pretty pleased about bearing that standard, but even he has a moment of where he pales as he realizes, just how important the standard is and whatnot. As you could have knocked the Paladin down with a feather, he seemed to actually turn pale. Yeah. And here, like, only the Duc d'Alençon will take precedent over Jean and Pierre. I will say this, though. The Paladin under Jeanne's command has worked to earn his place. I think that we need to bear that in mind. As much as he's a comedic character to an extent, well, like, you know what I mean? Like, he's treated like so a lot of the time, and he behaves so.
He brings comic relief.
Yeah. But he is truly when he's around Jeanne, he becomes a lion rather than a lamb.
They use him as a dichotomy. Like he's a dichotomy of two extreme. He's almost schizophrenic as a character, because on one hand he's comic relief, and on the other hand he is a saviour. He's Peter. Peter was the first to say, "I would never betray you," but of course he does. But it's not held against him. He never did it on purpose. He wasn't a bad guy. He just erred, and that's who he is. He's a character that lies, which Joan hates liars, but he lies to inflate his own ego. But it's never with a bad intent. It's just who he is. He's just that character.
Yeah. You said he lies, but there's no ill intent. He's someone who, while he lies all the time, and there's no harm in it, his heart is nonetheless very true, and there's a goodness in there. And his lies are never with ill intent, as you said, but they bring no ill down upon anyone. So
yeah, they're harmless.
In his heart, he's always truthful. So that brings into question, and given that, like, he says, "Oh, I'd be such a great warrior," everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you're lying." But then he proves himself to actually be that great warrior. So are they really lies?
Or are they just fabrications of his mind, that his mind has replayed the battle, And yeah, and there are people like that. They really believe that what they say is true, even when everyone else knows it's a pure exaggeration. Chapter 25, it says, forward. Oh, it's like a breathing sigh of relief, that title name. What were your personal thoughts on the chapter?
And I like that while the king is very reluctant, and while some members of the court were probably hoping that the Duc d'Alençon and Jeanne would be at odds, they don't seem to be, which I think drives them a little up the walls. No, wait, it's the young comte. My mistake. I misread that. The young comte was dying to go too, but the king held him back for the present. But Jeanne had made him a promise. In his letter, he said, "She told me that when the king restores Rheims, I shall go with him. But God grant I may not have to wait till then, but may have a part in the battles." She also is a bit of a friendship with the Duchesse d'Alençon, who worries about her husband. I find the scene between her and Jeanne very tender, where she's told, "You must watch over him, dear, and take care of him, and send him back safe. I require it of you. I will not let you go till you promise." And you have Jeanne, "I gave you the promise with all my heart. And it is not just words. It is a promise. You shall have him back without a hurt. Do you believe? And are you satisfied with me now?" Now, what this scene also reminds me of is where Jesus in the Bible says, "So long as you believe in me, you will make it, like safe or whatever. But is your faith so weak?" I think there's where he says something like, I think, "I am the truth, I am the light of the world. Those who walk with me shall not walk in darkness," or something to that effect. And I hope I'm not misremembering anything. And
It's okay.
he's always assuring the doubtful.
It is a tender moment. You're absolutely right. I think it's very astute of Mark Twain to put this in. He could have got caught up in the story of war. He could have got caught up in the story of the men. But he has remembered that there is wives and children associated with these men. And even though we think of these warriors as the bastard, La Hire, these sort of men, but behind them there's these women that care about them and want to see their husbands come home. I had two takeaway points from this chapter. One, the first section, where the king is finally willing to venture. So he's showing all this cowardice, but once he's told, "Well, we'll clear it out first, and then you can follow behind," he goes, "Oh, okay, yeah." And that reminded me of, I think it's in John, the Bible, the letter about Jesus, John, where there were those very prominent leaders, right, it was a week before he died. They knew he was the Lord, but were not prepared to say it out loud. And the reason they weren't prepared to say it out loud is because they might get kicked out of the temple. And that was too much fear. So they had fear of man, not fear of God. And here you have the king with this fear of man, not fear of God. Fortunately, Joan has a fear of God, not a fear of man. She's like, "I've got to do what I've got to do. I'm here to do my mission." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'll follow from a distance." And my other takeaway point is you see that when she goes amongst the men and she rouses them and they go, when these military men see her, it rouses their spirits, it rouses their hearts. They cheer, they can't help but cheer, and they can't wait to fight because she's near. And I thought about all the times I've played football, and I'm not a particularly good soccer player, but if there's been girls watching, I suddenly find a new gear. Or if I'm at the gym, and recently, so there's this woman at my gym.
Yeah, I think though that there's something in all men that we find our testosterone when there's a woman around, if we're doing sports or anything, and we suddenly want to print and like the stag hold up our horns higher.
Well, so literally about 3 weeks ago, there's this woman at my gym. She's very, very beautiful, very nice, very kind. And I say this with all caution because I'm not trying to chase her up or anything like that. But I was doing a particular workout and she was nearby and she was the only person around and I needed someone to spot me to get just that little bit extra. And I said, "Do you mind spotting me?" And out of nowhere, I found an extra 20%. Out of nowhere. Why? Well, it was because she was watching. Well, she was actually helping. And I just found more. And I think you find more as a man, if you're a man who's attracted to women and there's a woman nearby, for some reason in these ventures that are, as you say, high testosterone, you just suddenly find that extra 10, 20% that didn't exist. And that's what she's doing here. And again, Mark Twain is saying that without saying that. And I just think it's fantastic. Right, our final chapter for review.
I'm really running out of time here. The last doubt.
One bit.
Go on, please.
One last note on chapter 25.
Yeah.
One title for Jehanne, Daughter of God.
Yes. Sorry, you're absolutely right.
She's called such. And it's very reminiscent of the Son of God or the Son of Man titles that Jesus lays claim to. Just
100%. I apologise for missing that, guys. That is like right out of my wheelhouse. But no, that's why you need 2 people to review a book minimum. So the last doubt scattered. Any thoughts to wrap this section up?
You're referring to when he assures the king, I believe.
Yeah. The last doubt scattered. Chapter 26.
Nope, wait. 26.
Yeah, chapitre 26.
Okay. 26. Laisse-moi juste voir. Yeah, this is after she's had to also assure the Dunois and the king, like, okay, come on. We start on this journey. You guys say it'll take 6 weeks. The English veterans have apparently gathered 7,000 soldiery with artillery, and the great Earl of Suffolk and 2 de la Pole brothers arrayed against her. And this frightens some. And La Hill says, by God, she knows her trade, and none can teach it to her, and none can teach it her. Which there's almost a religious fervor to him saying, we should not even try to teach her warfare. We should just, she says something, we just follow.
Yeah.
We just have blind faith here. And there's something of the great leap that can be found here. Like, there's always the blind faith, the leap of faith. That's it. That Campbell talks about, that the heroes on the hero's journey always have to go on, and they have to take a leap of faith. And that's what Hill is proposing here, which, yeah. And you, of course, get, this chapter has quite a bit of bonding between Jeanne and La Hill. And you have Lenain, the dwarf, who comes in brave new armor, as it's worded. And he has on one of his ample shoulders a kitten asleep, which is both adorable, but there's something of how in battle he is the spirit of war made flesh, as Mark Twain calls him, but outside of battle, what Twain shows here is that he's as gentle as a lamb, and that deep down the dwarf is a good man. But the thing is, life dealt him a raw deal. This is further, I think, with just that one sentence, he's trying to cement in our minds that he was fed a very real, but he's still a good man.
Did you ever watch obviously you must have read and watched Of Mice and Men?
No. Okay. I've heard the title, though.
Very famous piece of literature. I think it's American written. I can't remember who wrote it. But the main character he's got a mental health condition. He's this big beast of a man, but he loves rabbits. And he loves the wabbits.
Sounds familiar.
And you must watch the film. Gary Sinise and John Malkovich. And read the book. Read the book. It's amazing. But you find, like, if you want to find softness in a character, just introduce an animal. It works perfectly. And that really is this character here. 2 chapters ago, we were reading about how he was slaying everyone around Joan when she was injured. And a few chapters later, he's guarding her with a kitten on his shoulder. What a great contrast on a character. Right, I've got 5 minutes until I've got a meeting. I must apologise to you, Joseph. I need to conclude it here. We're going to continue with chapter 27.
No problem.
And we're going to go to chapter 34, I think, next time. No, chapter 33.
Okay.
So I will see you presently. Guys, thank you for joining us. We've really enjoyed it. We are loving this book, and we can't wait to do our next book. And both Joseph and I have exciting stuff ahead. And so keep tuned and stay tuned. Joseph, I bid you adieu. À la prochaine.
À la prochaine, mon ami. Don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button here on YouTube or on Storyfire. And also go check out Sam's channel, which is Two Cents and a Dog, which I'll post both the Storyfire and the YouTube link for your channels, as you have a few, and they are quite good.